Here's something that surprises a lot of motorcycle fans. More than a century before motorcycles had ride modes, traction control, TFT displays, or enough electronics to launch a spaceship, Harley Davidson built a machine that was already proving itself on brutal roads, long-distance endurance rides, and even battlefields. And that machine was the 1916 Harley Davidson Model J. At first glance, it looked simple: no front brake, no suspension worth bragging about, tiny horsepower by today's standards. But don't let that fool you. Hidden beneath that vintage frame is a motorcycle that completely changed Harley Davidson's future, helped shape American motorcycling, and introduced engineering ideas that many riders still benefit from today. Even more fascinating, one small mechanical feature on this bike gave Harley a huge advantage over many competitors, and later in the video, I'll explain why collectors are willing to spend astonishing amounts of money for an original Model J. Before we get into all that, smash that subscribe button like you're kicking over an old Harley on a freezing winter morning, because we've got an incredible journey through motorcycle history ahead. Now let's rewind over 100 years, and trust me, the story only gets more impressive from here. The year was 1916. Cars were becoming more common, roads were still rough, and motorcycles weren't luxury toys. They were transportation. They were workhorses. They were machines people depended on every single day. Harley Davidson itself wasn't the giant company we know today. The company had only been around for about 13 years after being founded in Milwaukee in 1903. Competition was everywhere. Brands like Excelsior, Indian, Pope, Thor, and Henderson were all fighting for customers. Building a motorcycle wasn't enough anymore. You had to build one that was reliable enough to survive roads that often looked more like dried-up riverbeds than highways. That's exactly where the Model J entered the picture. Instead of chasing flashy styling, Harley focused on something much harder: durability. This motorcycle was designed to keep running when many others gave up. Think about it. No GPS, no roadside assistance, no smartphones. If your motorcycle broke down 60 miles from home, your mechanic was basically you. So Harley engineered the Model J to be dependable, serviceable, and strong enough for everyday punishment. And one particular engine design would soon prove why Harley was thinking years ahead of many competitors. Now let's talk about the heart of the motorcycle. The Model J used a 61 cubic inch V-twin engine, which equals about 989 cc. Today that sounds modest. Back then, it was serious performance. The engine featured Harley Davidson's famous 45-degree V-twin layout, a configuration that would eventually become one of the company's trademarks. Power output was roughly 11 horsepower. Now don't laugh. 11 horsepower doesn't sound impressive today, but remember, most roads in 1916 weren't built for speed. Many weren't even paved. This motorcycle wasn't designed to race superbikes. It was built to conquer terrible roads while carrying riders for hundreds of miles. One of the biggest engineering breakthroughs was the use of F-head valves, sometimes called an inlet-over-exhaust design. Here's why that mattered. The intake valve sat overhead, while the exhaust valve remained beside the cylinder. That unusual setup improved breathing compared to earlier flathead designs while keeping manufacturing relatively simple. It offered better efficiency, better cooling, and improved reliability. That's one reason the Model J became one of Harley's most successful motorcycles. It also featured a 3-speed transmission, operated manually. And yes, changing gears back then required considerably more skill than today's motorcycles. Miss a shift, and the bike would remind you immediately, kind of like your math teacher when you forgot your homework. But Harley wasn't finished innovating. The next improvement made riding significantly easier. One reason the Model J stood out wasn't because Harley reinvented motorcycles overnight. It was because they improved dozens of small things that riders actually cared about. For example, earlier motorcycles often required riders to pedal to get the engine started. Yes, pedals. Imagine explaining that to someone riding a modern touring bike. By 1916, Harley had refined its kick-starting system, making starting the motorcycle much more practical. The lubrication system also continued improving, helping the engine survive long rides with fewer mechanical failures. Ignition reliability improved as well. That may not sound exciting today, but reliable ignition in 1916 could mean the difference between reaching your destination or spending hours stranded beside a dirt road wondering why your motorcycle suddenly decided it needed a vacation. Harley also kept refining the frame geometry. The bike wasn't comfortable by today's standards, not even close, but compared to many competitors of the era, it delivered impressive stability. The seating position was upright. The controls were simple. Everything focused on function rather than luxury. Ironically, that philosophy became one of Harley Davidson's greatest strengths, and soon, events happening thousands of miles away would push the Model J into one of the most important chapters of its life. Only a year after this motorcycle entered production, the world changed dramatically. World War I intensified. Military organizations began realizing motorcycles could perform jobs horses simply couldn't. They could carry messages, scout dangerous terrain, escort convoys, transport personnel faster than ever before. Thousands of Harley motorcycles eventually entered military service during the war, while later military versions received modifications for battlefield duties. The Model J laid much of the engineering foundation. Military use proved something incredibly valuable. These motorcycles weren't just reliable in advertisements. They were reliable under some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Mud, dust, rain, long hours, minimal maintenance. If a motorcycle survived military service in those conditions, everyday civilian riding suddenly seemed much easier. That reputation helped Harley Davidson earn trust worldwide. But there's another reason surviving examples have become incredibly valuable today, and it isn't just because they're old. Finding an original 1916 Harley Davidson Model J today isn't easy. Finding one that's still mostly original? That's like discovering an untouched treasure chest. Many motorcycles from this era were heavily modified. Others were dismantled for parts. Some simply wore out after decades of use. Remember, people bought these motorcycles to ride, not to preserve for museums. Original paint, matching engine numbers, factory components, correct accessories. These details dramatically increase value today, depending on originality, condition, and documented history. Restored or well-preserved examples can sell for astonishing prices at auctions. Some collectors spend years searching for the correct carburetor, original fuel tank, or authentic lighting equipment just to complete one motorcycle accurately. That's dedication, or as some family members might call it, a very expensive hobby. But preserving these machines isn't just about money. Each surviving Model J represents a living piece of engineering history. Every scratch tells a story. Every bolt reminds us how motorcycles evolved. And that brings us to perhaps the biggest reason this motorcycle still matters today. When people think about Harley Davidson today, they often picture massive touring motorcycles, rumbling cruisers, and unmistakable V-twin sound. But none of that happened overnight. Motorcycles like the 1916 Model J created that foundation. Its V-twin layout became part of Harley's identity. Its emphasis on durability shaped the company's reputation. Its engineering lessons influenced future motorcycles for decades. Even Harley's relationship with military organizations and law enforcement grew stronger because early motorcycles like this proved they could handle difficult work. What's even more remarkable, this motorcycle is over 110 years old, yet enthusiasts still restore them, ride them, display them, and celebrate them at vintage motorcycle events around the world. That says something extraordinary. Technology usually becomes obsolete. Great engineering becomes timeless. And the Model J belongs firmly in that second category. The funny part? If you park one beside a brand new touring Harley today, they'd look like they came from different planets. Yet deep down, they still share the same DNA. That's the kind of legacy very few motorcycles ever achieve. The 1916 Harley Davidson Model J wasn't the fastest motorcycle. It wasn't the most powerful, and it certainly wasn't the most comfortable by today's standards. But it arrived at exactly the right moment in history. It helped Harley Davidson prove that reliability could be just as important as speed. It introduced engineering improvements that pushed motorcycle design forward. It served during one of history's most challenging periods. And more than a century later, it continues to earn admiration from collectors, historians, and riders across the globe. Some motorcycles become famous because they're quick. Others become legendary because they changed history. The 1916 Harley Davidson Model J managed to do both in its own unforgettable way. And that's why, more than 100 years later, this remarkable machine still commands respect every time its engine comes to life.